Uh, Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Lavamanier. I'm a senior product designer on the UX Papercuts team here at GitLab. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about a side project I've had going on on the back burner for the last couple of months, with a few tangents into some live code prototyping and professional development. So the problem that I was trying to address is that I kept finding that every time I was preparing to go out of office, I would go and change my GitLab user status because we use that internally to signal availability for, reviews, all that sort of thing. I know that the bot that suggests people actually looking at things in Slack, I think, but I tend to check someone's, status whenever it says that they're busy to see what's going on with them. And when I was going and setting an out of office status, I was finding most of the time that like the canned options for when the status expires didn't usually match up with the dates that I was actually going to be around. So here is my actual profile. And if I go to set a status, we've got kind of like, I think like a pseudo exponential decay thing going on where it's like expired after half an hour, 3 hours, 8 hours, blah, 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 blah. So if it's Friday and I'm going to be out of work for like the next 3 business days, then that's 4 days from now. That doesn't work. Just as an arbitrary example. So I have definitely seen situations, and I think I've also had this happen with me, where someone sets their status because they're going to be out of office, but they're going to be out of office for a time that doesn't match up with these, and then they forget to clear it later because they just didn't set an expiry on it. So I was like, well, I can do something about this. So I actually created an issue about this, about creating custom status message expiries. Um, the idea being basically just that there's kind of like a custom option in that dropdown, and then you can choose a date. And then I opened a merge request and did it. So this is my GDK. I know it's the same picture, it's confusing, but this is the admin user on my GDK. And this is what the current prototype version of it looks like. So if I set a status, then when I set an expiry, I can just choose some date. So let's say that for the next, what's the date today? Today's the 21st. So let's say that for the next 2 months, I'm saying hello world. I can set that. And then you do have to refresh this page in order to show a status. But that's not related to my code changes. So now I've got the status set on the GDK. And if I take a look at this, then it'll say, yeah, October 21st at midnight, it's going to expire. So I was like, okay, that's not bad. I've got it kind of going on. There are a few tricks about this. One thing is you may have seen that it expires at midnight. I would like to actually put in a specific time for expiry. We don't really have a pattern for inputting time that's too thought out yet in GitLab. I think the only place that we do it is for banner messages, and we basically just use the browser's default time input, which is fine, but is not, it looks different from our inputs. So there's a bit of iteration to do there. But while I was like iterating with this and playing with it locally, I realized that one other technical challenge here is that we actually allow users to set their statuses via API. So I had to make changes to our API as well, because the API currently only accepts those strings for those fixed expiry offsets. So I changed the API in this merge request as well to also accept a integer. And the integer is just a number of seconds in the future that's calculated on the front end and then sent to our API. So that you could use the API to say, in like 60 times 60 times whatever to do the math, number of seconds in the future, expire the status. And so, that's good. That's on the back burner. Like I've been working on other things. But then I realized, oh, what would be even nicer is if I could schedule statuses in the future. But that's harder to do, especially like doing it within our UI. What does that schedule look like? Where do you manage those things? So I decided that I could kind of kill two birds with one stone with this. And I built an app that will talk to our API that will schedule status updates for me. Because then I could kind of have, like a sandbox environment where I'm not touching other stuff in like GitLab, but it can actually be working in the real world and update statuses, and I can experiment with it in real time. Uh, So that's this project. I called it GitLab Status Minder because I don't, naming is hard. Naming is the hardest problem in technology. And it's live. It's real. Basically, what it is like it's just a Rails 7 app that I spun up. And you can like create a user account and you add a GitLab personal access token in order to talk to the API to set your status. And then you pick what your time zone is. I can probably figure out an improvement in the future to automatically set your time zone, but I didn't do that yet. And this is what it looks like. This is my actual, so this is for my GitLab user. This is the schedule of like upcoming statuses I've set for like basically just PTO and recovering from PTO throughout the rest of this year. So let me show it to you working live. So I can set a status. This we have a limit on the number of characters in status, so it's got a little counter to let you know when you're going over, and then you can spell hello correctly if you want to as well. Right now, it starts the default as just 1 minute in the future or so, but well, I'll just do that now, and then I'll set this to expire in like 2 minutes. I'll add an emoji. And I won't say I'm busy. So if I save this, so it saved. So if I go back here, it says it's scheduled for now. I refresh. Okay, so now it's been posted. It's in my posted statuses. And if I go back over here to my profile and refresh the page, there's the status. Now, if I talk to you for another 2 minutes and refresh this page, the status won't be there anymore. There was like a lot of iteration that had to go into this thing. I actually just yesterday was able to get GitLab's own Max Wolf to jump on a quick call with me in my morning / his late afternoon because he knows a lot more about Rails than I do. And he helped me figure out why Heroku kept going to sleep and making my app not work, which is like the whole point of the app is that like you tell it to do something in the future and then it does that thing at that time, and it wasn't doing that because the dynos would go to sleep. So he helped me figure out some Heroku configuration stuff. I think that there are probably things in this kind of prototype app that I will talk with the auth team about. They're the ones who own user status for some reason, and I think they inherited it. Obviously, I didn't want any of the look and feel of this to feel like GitLab. I just wanted it to be like a simple thing that I could experiment with, and it's more about the function than the form. But I have been trying to test it out with kind of a small group of other people. Sasha tested it out with me, and also bore the brunt of it not working. So he like set a status for the future, and then he went on vacation, and then the dynos went to sleep in my Heroku app, and then it didn't set a status for him. Sorry, Sasha. But it does work now. And if you want, you can also try it out. And I think that's kind of all the stuff I had to show. It is now 11:29, so I'm going to refresh this, and that status should be gone. So, questions? Oh, I can go look at the doc.
Yeah, it looks like Austin has a comment.
Yeah, and say, Chad, this is a sweet proof of concept that is great because we can already use it if we want to. I'll admit I'm like leery of having to give things my API personal access token. But that aside, what are you hoping to further validate to like bring this as like native functionality into the app?
Sure. I mean, quite frankly, the main thing I want is just to use it myself. The custom status expiry, I do want to do some validation about, although the team that owns it is like pretty on board with like, oh yeah, that's great. Let's add that improvement. I think that if other people try it out and then say, hey, I wish this had this, or oh man, like I'm really enjoying using this, I wish this were part of the thing, then I might, talk more seriously with the auth team about incorporating that functionality into the app. But there's just like a lot, it becomes way more serious at that point, right? It's like, well, how do we do this kind of thing? Do we have patterns for like queued up things that would work for this? It's really different from like a pipeline or something. So there's like a lot more decision making that has to go into like actually trying to incorporate it into the product as opposed to just like, no, this is just like a thing for fun that's basically just a third-party app that generates for their API.
No, I mean, that totally makes sense to me, especially from just wanting to get a proof of concept out there to validate, like, is this even useful to me myself?
Mhm.
It kind of reminds me of what Marcel did when he initially built GitDoc, just to try and give himself a way to test something. But yeah, I'm always just kind of curious because I know it's cumbersome to figure out ways to like make it real in the product as opposed to getting to build it in your own sandbox somewhere else. So thanks for clarifying. Good work.
Yeah, and Jeremy, next.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I was just curious about like team status, like as a feature. That's one of the things where it's really tough to just see. You can go into whatever the time off by deal or whatever, and figure out when people are out and schedule and whatnot. But it's really hard to see what teammates are set to or who to ping. So, is that a possible extension? I'm just curious if you've thought
Hmm.
about that.
That's interesting. Uh, I definitely could see how you could make you honestly don't even need a well, you kind of need a back end for that. I could see how you could do that pretty simply with our API because you basically just need to say, hey, this set of people, give me a digest of their current statuses. So it's something that you could like do right now on the command line with our API. It's an interesting idea to kind of make kind of that reminds me a little bit. There's a thing that IP made that like tells you what time it is for different people at GitLab, and you can kind of filter and search by people. It feels similar to that sort of thing. This one is much more focused just on managing your own statuses. And oh, well, I it already cleared, so I can't show you, but I could just add a new one again. So I also added in like reposting them. So if I repost this now, um, and then give it a sec for the API call to succeed. If I refresh this page, it does actually show you your current status as well. And that's just reading from the API to get your status. So yeah, that's an interesting idea. It wasn't part of the original scope of this, but there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff you can do basically with our API that like someone who has the time and wants to do it can put into an app, into like a third party app.
Marcel, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. Looks really cool, really interesting. I want to mention one slightly related aspect. I think currently a ton of people are hacking the status also to communicate out of office,
Mhm.
to communicate vacation. That's something I've always been curious on whether we can better communicate that as an actual feature within GitLab, as we then can also better make sure that it shows up at the right moments. For example, warning you if you want to set somebody as a reviewer and they're actually out of office. Aspects like that, where something like this can be really more integrated, could really help us in the next steps of building that awareness in.
Yeah, I don't know all of the history of user statuses in GitLab, but it kind of feels like it probably started as like an aim away message kind of thing. And then I'm guessing that the busy status got added later as kind of just a stronger signal. It's like, hey, please don't bother me. Um, but I think, and it's probably the right decision, I think that it was never made an operational piece of data where it's like you can't do something if someone has their status that's busy or something like that. It is an interesting idea though to say like, hey, if you try to, add someone as an assignee or as a reviewer, a full thing pops up just information, and it's like, just so you know, they're not going to respond to you. There probably are. I mean, I wonder if there are ways for us to leverage AI to do things like that. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely would be nice if it were more holistic, kind of. But then again, also, we are not our users. I'm not really sure how many users who don't work at GitLab use statuses in this way. I have a feeling a lot of people just like set a status and leave it there forever. Like my personal user, this guy, has had the same status for months just because it's a similar username. So it's like, hey, this isn't the work one, go to that one. Um, But yeah, statuses are like they're pretty much just a string of information right now that could be more operationally useful, but like I'm not really sure how many users in the real world are actually using them in such a critical way that we use them internally. It's kind of like labels, right? Like everything we do relies on labels, and then like our real users maybe somewhat less so.
Yeah, I think we have put the busy information in some places where it's more contextually relevant, like the
Yeah, like we
reviews.
put it next to the name on like an assignee list or whatever, but not when you're editing that information, because that when you're making that decision, I agree that would be a nice place to have that information in hand to better choose.
Yeah, yeah, and some of these places are positions where we have intentionally not added the emoji and only the busy status. So it's always interesting how we can use that more contextual information more intentionally.
Yeah, and whenever I'm going to ask someone to review an MR, for example, if I'm typing their name and it says busy on the little like auto suggest, what I'll usually do, because I use Markdown, and by the way, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing this is like kind of a weird janky flow. Because I use Markdown, I will type their @ and then I'll click preview so that I can hover over it so that I can see what their actual status is, because it might just be, oh, like ping me, I'm real swamped, or it might be, I am out of office and will not respond to you. And like those are different levels of like busy. I also feel like there's a lot of people who just set themselves as busy because they don't want to be bothered, but they are at work. So like what busy means is kind of a spectrum too.
Angela? I don't know where you're at to know if you're muted or not, but we can't hear you.
Sorry, I had 100 windows open. No, there were some announcements. I'm not sure exactly the timing, but PTO deal is going to be replaced by Workday.
Yeah, I think whatever it would be that like something could integrate with, I feel like the Slack API or like Google Calendar integration or something like that would probably be a more reliable indicator. Yeah.
And then Austin has a couple read-onlys. So if there aren't any more questions, we could jump into the next presentation. Looks like no. Okay, thanks, Chad.
Thanks, everybody.
Cool stuff.